Here's How Not to Die cookbook.
Actually, I have all those on the website. I'll go
Yeah,
through
they're all.
right now.
Yeah,
Yeah, I think all the ones that you just mentioned.
I think there are. They're all there. Yeah. And Plant U is a good cookbook. I think it's gonna be a nice one.
So here under resources, cookbooks. So if you click on cookbooks off the resources list,
Well, this is open.
here's the Plant U one.
There it is.
And there's How Not to Die, Plant-Powered Families, How Not to Diet. There's some other ones, China Study, Forks Over Knives, Straight Up Food, Dougal Quick and Easy Cookbook, a couple of other ones, Slow Cooker and an Instapot.
I'm not sure what you did.
Anyway, so they're all some of our favorites.
That will get everybody.
So the room's a little noisy, so I'm going to mute everybody so that everybody can hear. And then if you want to speak, you can unmute yourself and then you can speak up and then mute yourself again.
Which one is the cookbook for no oil?
It's the
all of them. I don't
yeah.
think any of them use oil.
The one
Plant U.
Plant U
is the latest one.
The one that is going to get used for dinner Friday night?
Perhaps. That's up to you.
That's the Friday night cookbook, Ken. That's the one we're having.
I'm talking about what Virgil said.
Yeah. Friday night's the Plant U cookbook. We're having roasted vegetables and portobello mushroom steaks.
So we've started the recording because we have enough people in the room, like a quorum. When we get over 20, it's like a quorum. And we oftentimes get into the 30s. This meeting this week, or the discussion session, is going to be on GI or gastrointestinal system. We'll try to cover all the topics you ever wanted to talk about. And if we don't cover them all, then you'll let us know. Yeah. You'll just unmute yourself and you'll have a question and we'll try to answer it. And either Scott or I'll try to answer it. If not, maybe someone in our group will answer it. Now, we're curious, are there new people? And if there are any new people, could you kind of just unmute yourself and tell us how you found out about the classes and what you might expect to, discover as you're chiming in here. So
it's like most of the names are familiar that I see.
Okay.
I have a friend who's supposed to be logging in from Alaska. When she comes in, should I let you know?
Yeah, that would be great. We'd
Okay.
love to, we love people from across the country and looking forward to that. So yeah, just you could unmute yourself and say she's here, or you could just send us a chat note. Does anybody have anything they would like to share with the group? Like, say we went on this walk, it was great. There's one coming up again. Maybe you'll want to participate. Anybody want to share that little tidbit with anybody else in the room?
I was disappointed Ken didn't come down and that Virgil and his wife didn't come.
Well, what did you think of the walk?
I thought it was the most magnificent activity I've participated in about 3 years. It really made, I really had a great day. People are just wonderful. Ooh.
Well, thank you, Jerry. And those of us who participated, it was a wonderful day. The weather was beautiful,
Yeah.
and everybody seemed to enjoy it.
Yes.
So, and thanks again to Debbie for bringing a few snacks. I don't know how you knew what to bring or how much, but kudos to you for doing that. And again, thanks, Scott, for organizing. You haven't had name tags. And the next event is going to be when, Scott?
On Saturday, July 23rd, 11 o'clock, we'll meet at the Valley River bike bridge there, right by back of the parking lot at Valley River Center. So I have the details are up on the Eugene Plant-Based Provider website under the upcoming events. It's already, Sean already got it updated there. So.
And it'll be announced again in July for those of you who like to keep really current. Like you have a cluttered calendar and you don't want to put too much on it. You wait till July to put on these events in your life.
And I always have it in the newsletter too, right? So it's there in the weekly newsletter.
So anybody else have anything that they wish to share with the group? Like, geez, I went to the doctor and I'm like amazingly better, or gee, this is not working for me. What am I supposed to do? Yes, Doug.
About 10 years ago, something like that, I became pre-diabetic, and I've been, trying to be good. And this is the first time in all that time that I'm no longer pre-diabetic. And I'm really not fully into the program. I'm approaching it, getting closer and closer, but even so, I'm no longer pre-diabetic.
Well, congratulations to you. We're thrilled to hear that. And, this is a good time to remind people that there's no judgment here. There's no police giving tickets, that you all get a chance to make the choices on your own, what you choose, what to eat. We share the science with you and you make a decision. And if you don't choose to eat the 100% whole food, plant-based, as I tend to promote and Scott tends to promote a bit, we both try to do that as best as we can. Doesn't mean we get upset if you only choose to do part way. If you're getting the benefits you want from what you're eating and you're happy, that's great. If you're not, and you come and ask me, why am I not controlling my blood pressure or diabetes, or I'm having this problem, you know what I'm going to tell you? I'm going to say, why don't you try this totally whole food, plant-based foods, or whole plant foods, forget the based, and just try it for a month and see how you feel and see if it makes a difference in your life. You don't have to do it for the rest of your life. See how you're feeling, and if it's working for you, you may continue on, and if not, well, that again is your choice, and it's okay. So, is there anybody else who would like to speak up? Dolly?
Okay, here's the elephant in our room.
Okay.
I had my labs done. Again, it's been about 3 months. And 3 months ago, they were, my A1C was down to 6.4, which I was turning handsprings over. And this time they were back up to 6.6. I wasn't very happy because I thought I was doing everything pretty darn good. And Scott was very kind to gentle on me to explain that I'm still using things that have some fat in it, and so that's probably what it was. So I'm trying harder, but I'm telling everybody it's me. I'm trying harder, and it's going to go back down again.
Well, that's one of the important things of having a coach. When you go learn to play tennis or learn to play the piano, if you do it, you may be able to do this on your own. And yet, if you have a coach, you tend to be able to do it more effectively, and they can say, you know, hold the racket a little different, or hold your hands a little different, or whatever it is. So if you regularly have a coach, like come to these classes and listen to the science, and then that may help you stay on track a bit better, or have someone who points out, geez, what are you eating? And you tell them, and they say, you know, there's a oil here and more fat here, and that fat is getting in the cell and it's keeping the insulin from doing its work properly. You know, the cell has plenty of energy, so the insulin is not working right. So what you need to do is get rid of that excess fat in your diet. Even though it doesn't seem like it's excess, it's a lot less than it used to be with you, as I understand it. But it may not be quite enough. It may have to go down just a bit more. And it sounds like you're on track to try that experiment with yourself.
Well, absolutely, because this has got to be a success. Well, I want to
Well-
live a long time,
Good for you.
but I'm verbally getting it out there, which is a good first step for me.
Very good.
you.
Thank you for sharing that.
I'm going to be going camping in a couple of weeks.
Yes.
What do you recommend as far as being able to eat plant-based?
I personally would recommend that you go to either Whole Foods or go online and get Patagonia beans and rice and black beans and whatever chili or whatever camping foods. There's an increased amount of salt in those foods. So if you're going camping for a few days and you're very salt sensitive, that could be a little problematic. If you're not that salt sensitive, it might not be as big a problem for you. There are other things you can take. It's dried fruits. You can get edamame that's in packages that you can use as a really good food source. They come with wasabi or they're plain. Again, dehydrated fruits last a while in a camping situation. And it's going to be kind of tough to get fresh greens, although you might try some kale chips, even though it has a little oil in it. You might take along some kale chips for the greens in your life. And maybe oatmeal could work. And does anyone else have any suggestions?
Go ahead. Ron.
When we go camping, a lot of times I'll pre-make stuff and freeze it. And then it takes a couple of days for a lot of that stuff to thaw out. So you've got time to use it. And then you can always start out with your fresh greens, but have other stuff prepared where you could just reheat it for yourself.
Thank you.
Great ideas. Yeah.
Anybody else? Nancy.
Yes, you can also make something like a lentil loaf, which is kind of like meatloaf, or using muffin tins, make something like the lentil loaf inside those so that you can pack those up. And if you're taking a cooler, you got it made. It's a main meal. And you can always grill mushrooms.
Nice.
Yeah, I've seen the recipe for the lentil loaf online on the website and just haven't checked it out.
There's also those carrot dogs that you marinate, and you can put those on the grill. Do like it's like hot dogs, but made of carrots.
And canned jackfruit.
There you go.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Okay, so I guess what we'll do is we'll get started with the GI stuff. And then at the end of the session or in the middle, we can have some more questions. Scott, you wanted to share a little bit?
Yeah.
And then I've got some videos to share, and we'll have some fun tonight with y'all.
Let me just go back. Here's back to the website. I just wanted to show on the under resources for books, because we have an associated book with a lot of our different classes, and tonight's class is one of those. So just under resources, if you hover over resources and click on books, I'll just go down to the different classes. We have a long list of books here. I just wanted to come down to it's actually both the Magic of Fiber class and the Gastrointestinal Health class, which is why I'd mentioned on the newsletter, if you hadn't attended or watched the Magic of Fiber class Charlie did, that's a good one that is a continuation basically of tonight's class with the GI health. So if you have any issues with tolerating the extra fiber that you're getting from a whole food plant-based diet, if you have irritable bowel syndrome, if you have ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, diverticulitis, hemorrhoids, pretty much any type, colon polyps, any type of gastrointestinal problem. This is a book that Charlie and I recommend everyone reads. It's called Fiber Fuel by Dr. Will Bulstowitz, and he's a gastroenterologist from South Carolina, and has a lot of good information about the gut microbiome. He's really knowledgeable about nutrition. So this is one that I definitely recommend. Kind of one of the things that I think that sticks with me a lot with reading this book is some of the things that he said was that the people that have the hardest time tolerating high fiber whole plant foods are the people that need it the most. And so they have the injured gut basically. And so they need to heal their gut. And so it's small steps, little bits at a time, and he can help you rebuild your gut and get your microbiome back where it needs to be, which is all those trillions of bacteria in the gut, and get that back going again. And so it's kind of the irony. I have patients all the time. Oh, I get gassy and bloated, and I can't tolerate eating beans or even many vegetables at all. And so I can't. How can I eat this way? It's like, well, that's a sign that you need it more than the average person. So because you have such an injured gut, but it takes time and a little bit of patience to kind of rebuild. And so this is a really good book to read, especially if you have any gastrointestinal issues. It could be really easy, like me. I'm more the typical, I would say more the more common person that goes from the standard American diet to whole food plant-based diet. I just had daily heartburn and daily irritable bowel syndrome before I changed my diet. So I used to be a paramedic, and I'll just tell you right now, I used to, when just the high intensity of stress with working as a paramedic, I'd often have to rush into the emergency room after delivering a patient to the emergency room and run to the bathroom to have an urgent bowel movement because I had such bad irritable bowel syndrome, and then I had daily heartburn. And for me, when I switched to a whole food plant-based diet almost 10 years ago, those symptoms completely went away once I did that. So, that's probably the more common with all the patients that I've taught this to. That's probably the more common scenario. But I have many patients that still have bowel issues even when they transition, and so they need a little bit more work. And this is a really great book for people that need a little bit more TLC when it comes to adopting this way of eating. So yeah, highly recommend that. So that's all I had there.
I have a friend that has a real problem with diabetes. I mean, not diabetes, with diarrhea. Would you recommend that book for her?
Yeah, for anybody that has, because irritable bowel syndrome can be a combination. It could be kind of chronic constipation. It can be kind of cycles of constipation and diarrhea. It can be chronic diarrhea. So pretty much any gastrointestinal problem, that would be a great book for someone to read for sure.
Okay, thank you, Scott.
Yeah.
So I second the recommendation very strongly. As Scott said, not only he recommends it, but I recommend that book to a number of people. It can be very valuable. So I'm gonna share my screen, and we're gonna start out with a little video from our friend Neil Bernard. He's the reversing diabetes man, but he does a lot of things in this world. And he has a pretty good overview of the digestive health and GI tract. So we're going to start with him, and then we're going to go to Alan Desmond, who's a GI specialist, and listen to some of his gut health. So let's start with Neil Bernard first. Can you see
Today we're going to talk about our digestive tract. You know, there is probably no part of the body that is as affected by foods as our digestive tract, because it's really the beachhead. It's where foods occur first. So let's take a look from the top all the way down to the bottom of how foods can affect us. First thing, gastroesophageal reflux, GERD, heartburn. That's when the stomach, which has acid in it, is allowing that acid to go up back into the esophagus, so you feel this burning sensation back behind your chest. Well, what causes it? We don't really know what causes it for everybody, but here are the most common suspects. Having extra weight, meaty diets, and other fatty foods. For some folks, it might be caffeine or alcohol. Peppermint is an interesting one. It actually loosens up that muscle at the top of the stomach, allowing the acid to come through. For some folks, it might be chocolate. But what we see a lot of the time is when people lose weight and when they go on low-fat vegan diets, for whatever reason, their GERD often cleans up. Irritable bowel. Irritable bowel syndrome is where your digestive tract really isn't your friend anymore. One day it's constipation, the next day it might be diarrhea. It really can't make its mind up. And you have pain with it and you have bloating with it. Well, one of the most common contributors to this can be milk products. Milk contains a sugar called lactose. And have you heard of lactose intolerance? It's a totally normal condition. All it means is that you're not a baby anymore, so you don't have the enzymes anymore for digesting milk. And this is actually the biological norm. What I mean by that is if you were to test adults all around the world, most of them have lactose intolerance. They no longer have the enzymes for digesting milk. So the lactase enzyme breaks the lactose into two smaller sugars, glucose and galactose, and once that enzyme is gone, you're stuck with this big load of lactose going down into your intestinal tract. Bacteria ferment it, they make gas, and that's a big cause of irritable bowel. Solution, leave the milk and dairy products off your plate. Very easy. Now there are some other contributors too, not just dairy products. For some people, artificial sweeteners, if they're using a lot of them, can irritate their digestive tract. Fatty foods can as well. When fat touches the intestinal wall, it causes the muscles to contract a little bit, and sometimes it's a little bit like squeezing a tube of toothpaste on both ends at the same time. Ouch. Some people might have a problem with wheat, some with eggs. Peppermint oil might actually help because in this case, it relaxes the muscles of the digestive tract. Now, even more serious, Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. These are inflammatory conditions. If you could look at the intestinal tract, it looks angry. It's red and it's inflamed, and sometimes it earns you a trip to the operating room. Well, see your doctor if you have these conditions by all means, but be conservative. If you don't have to have surgery, by all means put it off. And doctors are now looking at diet changes that might help. We're seeing this especially with Crohn's disease. For some reason, many people do very well when they get away from dairy products. High fiber foods used to be forbidden for people. Now we know that they're the best thing for you. So that means well-cooked beans and vegetables and fruits, whole grains. You might want to go easy on the raw vegetables and fruits if you're having trouble with them. Let's talk about gallstones. Gallstones can be really painful, but there's a lot we can do with our diet to improve things. The liver makes something called bile. It's a digestive juice. It helps us to break apart the foods that we're eating. The liver takes this bile, it sends it into the gallbladder where it's stored, and then after you eat a meal, it goes down the common bile duct and it goes into the intestinal tract to help us digest food. But sometimes this bile starts to crystallize. It's like it's forming little nuggets right in the gallbladder or elsewhere in that biliary tree. This is the pancreas, and you can see right there on the left-hand side there is a spot where a gallstone perhaps could form. Ouch, you don't want that. Well, if you could look at them under a microscope, what you discover is they're mostly made of cholesterol. So the solution to gallstones, surprisingly enough, is very much like the solution for heart problems. We want to lower our cholesterol. That means reducing the fat in our diet, especially the animal fat. Get that out of the diet. increasing high fiber foods, that's whole grains and beans and vegetables and fruits, and losing weight in a healthful way is really important too. Now, sometimes when people lose weight really too fast by starving themselves, sometimes gallstones can actually form. So what you want to do is to follow a low-fat, plant-based diet, and the weight loss is healthy and gradual. Let's talk about colon cancer. It's a serious condition, and it's particularly common in westernized countries. Why would that be? Well, it turns out that it's strongly linked to a meat-based diet. If you compare people who rarely have meat to men or women who have meat more or less every day, those who have it about every day have roughly 3 times the risk of developing colon cancer compared to people who don't eat meat or eat it only very rarely. Well, why would that be? Why would meat lead to colon cancer? Well, first of all, fatty foods actually change your intestinal bacteria. Did you know that you have bacteria in your intestine? That's perfectly normal. But if you feed them a fatty diet, it's a funny way to think about it, but that's what we're doing, those bacteria actually change. They become the kind of bacteria that can produce carcinogens from your own digestive juices. So you don't want to be feeding a lot of fatty foods to them. That means getting away from the meat. Secondly, you need fiber in your diet, but meat doesn't have any fiber. It's not from a plant, so it doesn't have plant roughage. And if you don't have fiber in your diet, what happens to your digestion? It slows down. And if it slows down, then anything that's there, any carcinogen, cancer-causing chemical, that might be working its way down your digestive tract, it stays there that much longer. And that's not good. So we want fiber in our diet. And third, cooking can produce some cancer-causing chemicals, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute. But you really want to bring back the fiber, and let me remind you of these numbers. We've talked about this before, but a typical serving of beans, about 7 grams of fiber, vegetables about 4, a typical fruit like an apple or an orange, maybe about 3 grams, bread, a little bit lower, a little bit higher depending on the type, cold cereals, roughly 3 grams per serving, oatmeal, about 4. Earlier I said that cooking can be a problem. A lot of people are getting away from fried chicken. That's a good choice. You'll skip a lot of fat. But some of them are switching to grilled chicken. And killjoy that I am, I have to say, I went and tested what's in grilled chicken. You know those black grill lines that you see? Well, it turns out when you send a little bit of that material to a lab and ask what's in it, they come back with something called FIP. Here it is. This will not be on the test, but this is the chemical structure of FIP. It's a carcinogen. That is, it's a cancer-causing chemical. How is it produced? When you grill skeletal muscle, I'm talking about the muscle of an animal. It could be a fish, it could be a chicken, or it could be beef. When it's cooked at that high grilling temperature, these carcinogens form. My team went to McDonald's. We went to Applebee's and Burger King and Chick-fil-A, Chili's, Outback, and TGI Fridays, and we took their grilled chicken sandwiches and grilled chicken salads. We sent them to a laboratory, and you know what? We found this FIP carcinogen in every single sample at every single one of these restaurants. So it's a reliable thing. If you want to avoid these carcinogens, the answer is pick something other than that grilled chicken. By the way, if you grilled vegetables, these cancer-causing chemicals don't form. It's formed when you heat up muscle tissue, that's meat, at a very high temperature. We've got more good news when it comes to colon cancer. Not only can we make diet changes to help prevent it, it turns out that a person who has been already diagnosed with colon cancer, if they make diet changes, they go to a plant-based diet, a high-fiber diet, it improves the odds of survival. And let me get even a little bit more personal, if I may. Let's talk about hemorrhoids. Years ago, a wonderful researcher named Dr. Dennis Burkitt started looking at why certain conditions are really common in Europe and America, but rare in Africa and other countries. And what he found is that if you're not eating fiber, well, what happens? You get constipated, but people spend a lot of time in the bathroom because they're constipated. And if that happens, then they start pushing extra hard. Are you with me? Well, if you're pushing hard because the person's trying to go to the bathroom, what happens is the blood vessels of the lower part of the abdomen start engorging with blood, and that's the cause of hemorrhoids. And you know what? The most grateful letters that I get from people are not from people where their diabetes went away or we've cured their cholesterol problem, but when their hemorrhoids went away, I got to tell you, that's one grateful person. Similarly, at the top part of the abdomen, your stomach is up there, and when a person is pushing really hard in the bathroom, their stomach can actually lift up through the diaphragm. That causes what we call a hiatal hernia, and that's the cause of heartburn. So very simple. Bring the fiber back in the diet. There's no more constipation. Going to the bathroom is an easy thing, and it's not a big issue anymore, okay? So we've talked about problems from the top to the bottom, and it's easy. A low-fat vegan diet, keeping the oils out of the diet, bringing the high-fiber foods in, that's going to really help your digestive tract and make you feel better too. Thanks a lot.
Okay, so I'm going to stop here, and we're going to try to sum up and see if you have any questions about this. You noticed he mentioned a vegan diet twice, and we want to clarify the issue. When he's talking about a vegan diet, he's not talking about a junk food vegan diet. We all know that you can eat Oreo cookies, which are vegan, but they're not healthy. Processed vegan foods are not on the menu if you really are interested in good health. What he is talking about is plants as they're grown in nature. They're very minimally processed, like you might heat them up, or there are a couple like, soy that you ferment to tempeh or make tofu. Those are healthy choices. They're minimally processed. But if they're majorly processed, stripping out their fiber and other nutrients, like converting whole wheat into white flour, that's not really a healthy option. So be careful when you're thinking about the term vegan, whole plant foods. We'd like you to get in the mindset of thinking this is whole plant foods. Foods is grown in nature is what we're promoting. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, on his website, on the PCRM, I mean, he'll occasionally talk about a few processed vegan foods if you're just a transition, kind of like if you're just trying to go from, instead of, some people aren't ready to go from bacon and eggs and sausage to steamed kale and beans for breakfast. And so sometimes they do a little bit of the Morningstar sausage or and then do oatmeal and things like that, just because it's not ultimately where you want to end up, but he calls it a transition food. And so if you do delve into Neil Barnard, he has a little bit of that in there temporarily.
I don't hear anything about drinking lots of water. I'm hearing everything about foods, but what about liquids?
Yeah, very important. So good question. So generally, I mean, everyone has a different requirement for water because it depends on your body size, muscle mass, activity level, how much you sweat, things like that. And so we usually just say, because it's, a certain number of ounces per day, it's a little bit too inaccurate. So the best way to think about it is just as long as you're having to urinate at least every 2 to 4 hours, and your urine should look like watered down lemonade. So pretty much clear with a slight yellow tinge. And then Dr. Greger has another test you can do, and if you're to see if you're getting enough water, and it's a little bit more scientific, but basically you completely empty your bladder, and then you drink 3 cups of water, which would be 24 ounces, because a cup is 8 ounces, so 24 ounces of water. And then 1 hour later, you should urinate 8 ounces. You should urinate a whole cup. And if you don't urinate after drinking 3 cups, an hour later, if you don't urinate a cup, then you're low on fluids. You should drink more. But the other thing too is, it's good to drink a lot of water, but at the same time, if you're going from a standard American diet to a whole food plant-based diet, the water content of the food you're eating goes way up, because think about most of the weight of whole plant foods is water. And so you're already getting a lot more water just from eating the food. So you don't necessarily have to drink as much water as you may have done on a standard American diet. But again, just follow how much you're urinating, how often, what it looks like, or you could do the Dr. Greger test there with the 3 cups peeing a cup. But did that answer your question?
Yep. Thank you.
Great. You're welcome.
Nancy.
Oh, hi. Well, first of all, I want to say I missed last week because my internet was out, like most of West Eugene on Tuesday. So I don't know if you noticed some West Eugene missing people last week, but I was one. But anyway, so I'm first of all grateful that you have the recordings up. So I was really happy to be able to see that. The other question about, I think that the emphasis on the effects of high level of processing is pretty important. And I have some vegetarian and vegan friends who are eating a lot of the fake meat, you know, and that stuff. And it feels like that could be a mistake. And I just wondered how you would weigh in on that stuff.
If you're transitioning your diet and that's what you need to transition, or if they are, that's a reasonable choice. It's good for the environment eating that, but it's surely not the healthiest choice. And the amount of fat and salt and potentially sugar that's added to those products, which are processed, do not make them high on the list of health food. They're not grown in nature. You don't see a plant-based burger growing on a tree or in the ground. And so, you know, it doesn't have the same vitamins, minerals, and other plant chemicals. There are thousands of these chemicals that are in real food. So when you're eating these fake foods, you can't expect the best health. Does that mean that someone would not have their health if they ate that? There may be some people, I call them freaks of nature, that no matter what they eat, they seem to get along okay. But for the average person, eating whole plants is the healthiest option. It's an excellent question. But again, for our environment, if we're really trying to save that, I would push those products to anybody, especially those people say, I am not giving up my meat and I am not giving up my whatever.
Okay, thank you. You've validated what my instinct has been from what I've learned so far. I am not personally tempted, but you know, I just wondered what to think of the situation. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Now, there was another issue, and that's the fiber issue. For those of you who made it to the fiber talk or have heard it before, it was brought up by Dr. Bernard that adding extra fiber decreases your colon cancer risk. He went over the reasons why. Increased speed of transport through the gut. There's a lot of reasons, but what I would like you to take home is that for every 10 grams of fiber you add to your diet, you'll decrease your colon cancer risk by about 10%. So if you add, the average American gets 14 grams of fiber. If you go up to 60 to 80, like I'm choosing to eat, then you reduce your colon cancer risk by a good 50, 60%. You also reduce your heart attack risk by 10% for every 10 grams. You reduce breast cancer risk by about 8%. So try to incorporate fiber, and you remember what he said, there's no fiber in any animal product. And then the last thing that I wanted to sum up is the PHIP, P-H-I-P. I don't know, were you surprised by the fact that when you heat up meat or animal muscle, that's chicken, fish, beef, pork, you grill it and you sear it, you produce these compounds which are cancer promoting, heterocyclic amines and PHIP and whatever. And so if we knew this and you knew that and you were raising a child, let's say you wanted to be healthy, would you really want them to be eating those foods that are carcinogenic? Just a thought. And then the last thing is baby's milk and the problems that certain, not only infants, but also adults have, and that's the sugar issue, the lactase. They don't have an enzyme to break down the sugar leading to a lot of GI upset. In fact, 75% of the world population doesn't tolerate milk. And again, we're the only species that steals another mammal's milk. Most all other mammals, in fact, all other mammals, once they're weaned, they don't drink milk at all. Why we continue to do that, it might have been valuable when we were starving in winter to do that, but since we have such an affluent society and we have food all the time everywhere in all the markets, milk is not a necessary component for our life. I'm having way too much fun here. Any thoughts from anybody else? Because we have the next video, we're going to go. Ken, go ahead.
Well, okay, I'll admit it. I get sucked into infomercials. And so I listened to this guy today. He says he's famous. He says he's helped thousands of patients. He's a famous chiropractor. But so he sucks you in by saying there's 5 foods you just shouldn't eat because they're so inflammatory. And this was to relation to arthritis. So he did a presentation on inflammatories. So his first one, and I've got to say, for the most part, he's promoting what you guys promote. And a lot of, I mean, you've talked about a lot of things tonight already, he mentioned, but he says the #1 major inflammatory food is gluten. We've touched on gluten, but not much. I was wondering if this is appropriate time to talk a little bit about gluten. Gluten is in bread, in noodles, all those kind of carbohydrates, and it makes food chewy. So we have been eating it all our lives and we like it. And not all of us are allergic to it. But I'm wondering, how serious is it that I should quit eating? I don't want to eat inflammatories because of some illnesses I have. So should I quit eating gluten?
Scott, do you want to answer that?
Sure. So yeah, if you have celiac disease, which is less than 1% of the population, you need to avoid gluten because you're allergic to it. The estimate is about maybe up to 10% of the population has some gluten sensitivity. And there is some truth to the gluten that's in wheat products today. Mainly it's wheat, barley, and rye, but there's some other grains that have a little bit of gluten in them. You know, there's some evidence that, you know, the gluten that we have here in the United States is slightly more problematic than the gluten you might find in other parts of the world. So there's, you know, some you know, truth to what he's saying there as far as avoiding gluten, because, you know, there are people that, if you're one of the 10%, not the 90%, then you might want to think about avoiding it, because there's so many other grains you can choose from. But I'm pulling up here on my phone because I have it, because I've had to send it to so many patients. There's actually the British Medical Journal did a prospective cohort study, and their title of the study was Long-Term Gluten Consumption in Adults Without Celiac Disease and Risk of Coronary Heart Disease, a prospective cohort study. And their summary is long-term dietary intake of gluten was not associated with risk of coronary heart disease. However, the avoidance of gluten may result in reduced consumption of beneficial whole grains, which may affect cardiovascular risk. The promotion of gluten-free diets among people without celiac disease should not be encouraged. And so in general, for 90% of the population, you don't need to avoid gluten. But, you know, again, if you feel like you're one of those 10% that has a little bit of sensitivity to it, you know, again, it's pretty easy to avoid gluten for the most part. And you can just go with some of the other grains. But again, in general, I would say for 90% of the population, it's actually what the study showed is that it can be harmful, because then what happens is a lot of people that aren't educated about nutrition, they just say, well, I'm just going to avoid whole grains. And actually avoiding whole grains is one of the top 5 dietary risk factors for death. Because there's actually been studies showing, Yeah, actually, number one is lack of fruit is number one. So the number one cause of death on the planet when it comes to diet is lack of fruit. It's number one, and lack of whole grains is in the top 5 as well. And then excess salt's another one, and there's some other ones. But in general, yeah, you don't want to avoid gluten, or because you don't want to avoid whole grains.
So Ken, you can eat your grains.
Thank you, because we like the whole wheat pastas.
Yeah, so if you like that, then you're gonna still keep eating it. But remember, whole wheat pasta doesn't grow in the ground or in a tree, so it's somewhat processed. It's not as healthy as like if you were to eat beans or lentils or like oatmeal or bulgur, some of the wheat cereals, kamut. Just a choice that you get to make. So if you like it, let me tell you, your taste buds can change. Nancy, we have one more question, then I gotta show a video.
Yeah, I just quickly, in response to Kenneth, I have been making my own bread from an older sourdough starter, because I had read that it's much kinder to the body and gentler, and you still using the whole grains, but it doesn't have some of the issues as regular commercial bread. And if you happen to know anything about that, if you could just comment on that. And that's all I had.
Again, sourdough bread may be healthier than others because of the fermentation process. I think if you're going to eat bread, it's probably one of the healthiest choices. I personally choose not to eat bread only because I know that there are healthier food choices. But if you like it and you're otherwise getting health benefits, that's fine. Scott, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, just in patients I have that have gluten sensitivity or celiac, they still can't usually tolerate it, but people with gluten sensitivity seem to tolerate sourdough bread better than other breads, I think, because of the fermentation process. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for doing that check. I mean, I have not been baking bread lately because of, moving away from eating bread, but I just wondered if that could help address some of Kenneth's, and I just wanted to know if that was true. Okay, thanks.
Thanks for the question. Now, let's see, I'm going to go back and share my screen, and we're going to play. It's about 23 minutes of Alan Desmond on gut health, and I think it's worth listening to.
Great, thanks Shireen. And thanks to everyone who managed to find the room. So it took me about 45 minutes. So well done everybody for finding your way. And thanks to the guys doing the BSL interpretation today. So they've told me they're going to try and sign an Irish accent for me. So I'm not sure how they're going to do that. So lovely to see you all. There's a few more people coming in. So come on in and have a seat. And there's loads of people leaving. Anyway, it's lovely to be here. Thanks very much. Well done for Shireen and all the team who've done far more. I'm basically just turning up and giving my talk. So thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. So I'm kind of I've put a pretty lofty question there for a gastroenterologist. Can a plant-based diet change your world? So I'm a medical doctor. I work at Torbay Hospital. I've got a small private clinic as well. I went to medical school in Cork, in University College Cork, and practiced medicine there. I graduated medical school in 2001. So I'm very much a conventional and mainstream medical doctor. So a part of this talk is about where are we with that now in 2019. Over a century ago, Thomas Edison predicted that the doctor of the future would actually give no medicine, but would instruct his patients in the care of the human frame, in diet, and in the cause and prevention of disease. I think he'd already recognized in the early 20th century that lifestyle medicine and unlocking lifestyle medicine might be the key to keeping people healthy and helping them to stay healthy. Unfortunately, over a century later, as physicians, we have completely missed the mark on that. to the point that in this opinion piece in the Journal of the American Medical Association, Journal of Medical Ethics, it's a mouthful, last year, David Katz made this statement in a kind of a rallying call to doctors around the world to sort of wake up to the need for more diet and lifestyle advice as part of conventional medicine. And it's sad but true, but the food that we eat now is now the main determinant of poor health in the Western world. So food, as he says, has undergone a truly dramatic transformation from essential sustenance into the single leading contributor to chronic disease and premature death. So can a plant-based diet change your world? So I'm going to talk mostly about my own areas of expertise, which are about gut health, health and longevity. Asking, can a plant-based diet help you to avoid long-term disease and long-term medication? And then I'm going to address some of the other questions that may not be my areas of expertise, but they always come up, and I hear people talking and asking about them a lot. Could you somehow be leaner or maybe even more athletic on a plant-based diet? Can you tread more softly on our planet? And can a plant-based diet help you to exercise compassion? But before we do all that, let's come back into my clinic. So the reason that I advocate and recommend a whole food plant-based diet isn't because I went to medical school and I was a vegan at medical school. The opposite may be true, actually. But really, it was my patients who brought me to a whole food plant-based diet. So one of the things that I spend a lot of my time treating, even since I think as a very newly qualified doctor back in 2002. So for the last 17 years, on a day-to-day basis, I've been involved in treating people with a condition called inflammatory bowel disease. Now, these are a group of conditions, these inflammatory bowel diseases, where sections of your bowel become inflamed and damaged and dysfunctional. We have medications that can help to reduce the inflammation, but very seldom get people into complete remission. For example, with Crohn's disease, which is about half the cases of inflammatory bowel disease, half of the patients who are diagnosed with inflammatory bowel disease are going to end up having surgery to remove part of their bowel, basically to remove a diseased part of their bowel because it's not functioning anymore. Almost all of our patients with inflammatory bowel disease end up on long-term medication, and being diagnosed with inflammatory bowel disease is no fun. Most people with inflammatory bowel disease would describe their health as being below good. And the rates of work absenteeism and school absenteeism are very high. And in fact, the inflammatory bowel diseases are diagnosed at a median age of about 30. So these are usually young people in the prime of their lives. They're working, they've got mortgages, they've got young kids, and now they're being told that they've got to come to the doctor's office every 3 months. And there's a good chance they're going to end up on some medication that means they're going to have to come up to a day ward every 8 or 12 weeks and sit in a room that looks a bit like a chemotherapy day unit, to be honest, and go on a drip and have medication to keep their inflammation under control. Now, when I was at medical school, we were taught that inflammatory bowel disease was kind of the paradigm of an autoimmune condition. You've gotten unlucky in the genetic lottery. There's something wrong with your immune system, so it's attacking your guts. So that's it, you're stuck with it, and we've got some medication that can help. But in fact, the more I've looked at it, the more I've realized, and mainstream gastroenterology is moving this way, that there's a lot you can do with diet and lifestyle. So your future is not set in stone when it was coming to inflammatory bowel disease. And whenever I would see or have or meet a patient who's been just diagnosed with one of these conditions, they'd already figured out that there was something to do with food here. So I've heard people asking the same question since my first day on the GI unit back in 2002. Okay, so I've been diagnosed with this, you've explained all that stuff to me. Is there anything I can do with food? And they don't mean, is there any food I should eat today to feel better or worse? What they mean is there any food I should be avoiding that can help me prevent that progression you've just described with more and more medication and increasing likelihoods of having surgery? In medicine, we're all about trying to give our patients evidence-based answers. So we'll only give our patients advice or a medication if we can look at medical studies that show us that they work. So that's a big stack of medical journals there to illustrate the fact that I've read loads of medical journals. Because over the years, particularly since becoming a consultant in 2012 and more recently the lead for treatment of inflammatory bowel disease at my hospital, I've been trawling through the mainstream medical literature so I could give my patients evidence-based answers. And I guess what I learned was there's a lot of very strong evidence out there, lots of stuff about inflammatory bowel disease that I never learned at medical school. So I learned that IBD is not just a genetic disease. There are a lot of various factors in the etiology of inflammatory bowel disease. And there's a huge amount of evidence that diet is extremely important, both in the cause of and the progress of inflammatory bowel disease. Inflammatory bowel disease didn't really exist as an entity in the early 20th century, but now it affects 1 in 300 people in Europe. Perhaps 1 in 200 people in the UK now has inflammatory bowel disease. You probably all know someone who has ulcerative colitis or Crohn's disease. When we look at the epidemiological data, there's very, very clear story that as countries industrialize their environment and industrialize their food chain, these diseases start to come up and start to get diagnosed. We saw it in Europe and the United States and Australia in the post-war years, and then more recently as countries like Japan and Egypt, etc., have westernized their lifestyles and westernized their diets, they're starting to see these diagnoses appearing. In fact, the Lancet Medical Journal a couple of years ago highlighted this issue in a huge editorial piece and just warned us that inflammatory bowel disease is actually a slow epidemic. In a few years, we're not going to have the resources to treat all these patients. And when we zoom in on the dietary risk factors, there's really compelling evidence that shows that dietary fiber, just the fiber that you get from eating plants and whole grains and vegetables, actually strongly protects you from developing inflammatory bowel disease. And there's strong evidence that eating the animal protein, so the more animal protein you eat in your diet, the more likely you are to develop inflammatory bowel disease. There's plenty of studies showing that dairy fat can induce inflammatory bowel disease. And there's some really, really interesting research that we could have spent the whole day on today on the effects of animal-based diet on the gut microbiome. So we've seen studies where you take people and you put them on a very animal product heavy diet, and their gut microbiome changes into a pro-inflammatory gut microbiome, which is actually capable of inducing inflammatory bowel disease. And there have been so many studies showing that food additives that we get in processed foods, like emulsifiers, polysorbate, maltodextrin, carrageenan, the evidence showing that these food additives are so pro-inflammatory in the intestine, particularly in patients with inflammatory bowel disease, that a few years ago, a team of researchers wrote to the Journal of Crohn's and Colitis and said, we've cracked it. Emulsifiers are causing Crohn's disease. They called it the emulsifier hypothesis of Crohn's disease. But in a way, they were right, but it's a much bigger story than that. So over the years, because I would go and look at all these various studies from disparate sources, these epidemiological studies, lab studies, dietary intervention studies, I slowly came up with this green list and this red list. So when my patients say to me, is there anything I should eat? Is there anything I should avoid? Came to the point where I would say to them, well, look, I'd prefer if you totally cut out processed foods and really avoided animal protein and animal fat and dairy. And I want you to avoid, in particular, food emulsifiers that are found in a lot of processed foods. And I want you to avoid the food additives that are found in a lot of processed foods. And I want you to build your diet around whole, unprocessed foods, fruits, vegetables, legumes, walnuts, flax seeds, beans and seeds, and whole grains. So before I even knew what a whole food plant-based diet was, I was already recommending to my patients that a whole food plant-based diet is really what the evidence tells us. If you want evidence-based answers, there's your evidence-based answer. Eat a whole food plant-based diet. It's impossible to read all that research about Crohn's and colitis without reading a lot more research about the effect of diet on the diseases and disorders that I see in my clinic every day, that we see on our hospital wards every day, or in our GP's offices, et cetera, et cetera. So I won't go through all of these, but it turns out that a whole food plant-based diet seems to tick all the right boxes for long-term gut health, whichever of these conditions you're looking for. So diverticular disease is a condition whereby you get these little pouches in the side of your bowel, predominantly your large bowel. They can get clogged up, they get infected. Your gut gets inflamed around the pouches. You can get stricturing. You can end up having a perforation or an abscess. You can end up in hospital. You can even have part of your bowel removed due to diverticular disease. Now, gladly, most people with diverticular disease don't end up seriously unwell, but they do have bothersome symptoms and it reduces their quality of life. We've known since the 1970s, when Dennis Burkitt was writing about his experience as a surgeon working in London and working in rural Africa, that among populations who eat a whole food plant-based diet, particularly a high fiber diet, nobody gets diverticular disease. Yet diverticular disease affects about 80% of 80-year-olds here in the UK, about 30% of 30-year-olds. And in fact, in the US, you can almost call it ubiquitous. If you live long enough in the United States, you're probably going to get diverticular disease. And if you have diverticular disease, and if you look at the studies showing, well, what are the characteristics of your diet that predict running into trouble with your diverticular disease? It's high meat and low fiber are going to run you into trouble. I'm just going to talk a little bit about colon cancer. Unfortunately, in my job, I sit down with people all the time and I tell them that I've just diagnosed them with colon cancer. So I might do that once, twice, or 3 times per week. Now, that's always a very difficult conversation, and I'm very aware that that person's going to remember that conversation forever, and it's going to change their life forever. Even if they do really, really well, it's going to change their life forever. So what about a whole food plant-based diet and colon cancer? Well, we know, even Cancer Research UK, who would be relatively conservative in their estimates, would estimate that 55% of cases of colon cancer in the UK are due to 3 factors, one of 3 factors: low fiber diet, red and processed meat consumption, and being overweight or obese. Just those 3 things. So 55% of the 42,000 cases of colon cancer that occur in the UK every year are entirely preventable by diet and lifestyle. And I haven't even mentioned alcohol and smoking. Just food we eat and physical exercise and maintaining a healthy body weight could dramatically reduce the numbers of patients who have that difficult conversation with somebody like me every year. Just at the end there, NASH cirrhosis. So NASH is non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, or fatty liver disease, or foie gras liver, if you want. So this is a condition whereby you have fat deposited on your liver. Your liver doesn't like having fat deposited on it, which causes the liver to be inflamed. And about 10% of people with NASH, that condition, will end up developing cirrhosis of the liver in about 8 or 9 years. That's without touching a drop of alcohol. It's completely separate to alcohol or other chronic diseases of the liver. Having cirrhosis of the liver reduces your life expectancy. So it's surprising that this condition that wasn't even described in the medical literature 50 or 60 years ago now affects 20 to 30% of people in the UK. So we have an absolute epidemic of NASH cirrhosis. And when we look at the dietary risk factors for developing NASH and putting yourself at risk at NASH cirrhosis, it's the more animal products you consume and the more processed foods and free sugars that you consume. What's the antidote to that? Whole food, plant-based. We're seeing NASH cirrhosis all the time in our hospital wards now. And essentially what we're seeing, and I can think of maybe 2 or 3 episodes of this already this year, is we'll sometimes get, for example, you saw an elderly person who's been admitted to hospital with pneumonia or a urinary tract infection or some sort of infection that can be serious enough when you're old, but usually people get better from, and they've been in hospital for 2 or 3 days, and then they go yellow because they've become jaundiced, and then they become encephalopathic and drowsy, and then they go into a coma. And then we have to sit down with their family and say, well, actually, you know, your mum's dying now. She's got liver failure. And they say, well, why is that? We say, well, the scans show that she has cirrhosis of the liver. They say, well, she never drank a drop in her life. We say, we know. This is NASH cirrhosis. We're seeing it more and more. So as a gastroenterologist, I recommend a whole food plant-based diet rather than a Western diet. For the same reason that my friends who are orthopedic surgeons tell their patients not to go skiing, because they've seen the harm that it can do. And I see the harm that a standard Western diet does every day of the week. So that's how I kind of came to reading all this research and, you know, talking to my patients with GI problems about eating more whole food plant-based. But I guess it comes to a bigger question, doesn't it? So if diet is the problem, so as we said at the start, diet is the single biggest cause of death and disability, what's the solution? There's so many solutions offered out there in the public domain and within medical journals. So I might be telling you stuff you already know, but who hasn't heard of the blue zones? Okay, so I'm speaking to about 7 people here. Okay, that's great. Well, for all 7 of you, So about 16 years ago, Dan Buettner and a team of researchers, he was a journalist, he had a team of epidemiologists and medical specialists, and they went around the world looking for the people with the longest lived and healthiest lives in the world. And they found these 5 geographically diverse areas in Loma Linda, California, Nicoya Peninsula, Costa Rica, Sardinia, Ikaria, Okinawa, Japan. And these were the areas in the world where not only, I mean, when you hear people talk about the blue zones, let's say, these are the places where you're most likely to live to 100. And that's a great headline. But if you're going to be healthy at 100, you have to be healthy when you're 16, and when you're 26, and when you're 36. So this is generally where people are healthy throughout their lives and at all stages of their lives. And as you guys know, because you've all heard of the blue zones, except those 7 guys over in the corner there, when they went to the blue zones, they found these incredibly healthy people. And why were they so healthy? Because in Okinawa, Japan, they found the people with the longest disability-free life expectancy in the world, living for 7 years longer than the average American. But they were living with far less disease. So much less breast cancer, much less colon cancer, much less cardiovascular disease, and all of that added up to a perfect recipe to be healthy at the age of 100, and they had 5 times as many centenarians as the average American. And you'll have seen this slide before. What were they eating? If food is the #1 determinant of our health and longevity, what were the Okinawans eating? That's a very detailed slide. That was from a paper that was published in the Annals of the Academy of Science way back in 2007. But essentially it's whole food plant-based. These people, the food that they were eating was 96% of plant origin. They were eating very, very, very little animal products. And in fact, they were only eating them on special occasions, really. I think I remember there was like a particular pork dish that they had at religious festivals or something, which accounted for their animal product intake. So Loma Linda, California, amongst the Seventh-day Adventists, they found another blue zone, another community of people who were super healthy, right in the United States, which we hold up as the paradigm of poor dietary habits. And they found that among this group, males were living 11 years longer than the US average, females living to 89, 9 years longer than the US average. And the Seventh-day Adventists are really interesting because they're actually a fairly similar group, whether they, in terms of their diet and lifestyle, because they put a great emphasis on physical activity and going outdoors. They don't smoke, they don't drink caffeine. They've got a great sense of community, a great sense of purpose. But of course, I want to know, what are they eating? And because of their religious beliefs, the Seventh-day Adventists hardly eat any animal products. And in fact, among the Seventh-day Adventists who do eat animal products, it only accounts for about 4 or 5% of their caloric intake. So they don't eat a whole lot of meat. And just going back to that previous slide, with that diet and lifestyle, they have far less breast cancer, digestive cancer, heart disease, stroke, and type 2 diabetes than the average American. Just on the right-hand side there, you may have seen those pictures before. That's a lady who's, I think she's like 102, and she's just driving to the old folks' home to hand out teas to the elderly folk. And that's the legendary Dr. Ellsworth Wareham, the 104-year-old gent who passed away last year. So he was a cardiothoracic surgeon who ate a plant-based diet all his life. And I think he practiced and operated up to his mid-90s. So we talked about colon cancer earlier. It's so common now, 1 million cases worldwide every year, and 40% of those are in the US and Europe alone, where 13% of the world's population live. So people may think it's inevitable, that it's just genetics, there's something about us that we're determined to get colon cancer. And I mentioned earlier that 55% of cases in the UK, that's over 21,000 cases of colon cancer, are thought to be due to either meat, low-fiber diet, or obesity. But if you switch to a plant-based diet, you can reduce your risk in weeks. There's a lovely study done about 3 years ago where they took a group of African Americans and a group of Southern Africans living in rural Africa eating a traditional plant-based diet. Now, African Americans have a very, very high rate of colon cancer. I think it's about 1 in 15, to the extent actually that African Americans are targeted for colon cancer screening in the US because they're high risk. So they have a risk of about 1 in 15. The rural Africans on their traditional African diet have a rate closer to 1 in 10,000. There's no colon cancer there. And are these groups totally genetically different, or is it their diet? So in this study, they took the African Americans and the Africans. Everybody had a colonoscopy, so they're all agreed to that. Half of the African Americans already had precancerous polyps. None of the Africans had polyps. And then they did a lot of really fancy science. So they looked at their gut microbiome, they looked at the protective levels of short-chain fatty acids like butyrate. They looked at something called the mucosal proliferation rate, which is a risk of your long-term risk of developing cancer. And as you'd expect, the African Americans were red in everything. They had high risk on everything. And the Africans were green on everything. They had a low risk when it came to all of those markers. Then they simply swapped their diets. So the African Americans started having okra and potato salad, and the Africans started having corned beef hash and bacon and eggs for breakfast. They just did it for 2 weeks, and then they repeated the colonoscopy and did all of the tests again. And just in those 2 weeks, even the researchers were surprised by the dramatic change. In fact, not only did the risk factors flip, so suddenly the African Americans had a very low risk of developing colon cancer. In fact, their risk was lower than the Africans. So you can really change your destiny in terms of these diseases that we would regard as inevitable. And of course, you can't talk about the medical benefits of a whole food plant-based diet without talking about heart disease, the top cause.
So I'm going to stop here. He goes on for a bit longer. I was sort of mesmerized when I was listening to him. I love listening to him. He is filled with facts. And he is very confident in summing up the information when it comes to eating animal foods and processed foods, the emulsifiers, the food additives as being pro-inflammatory. And, you know, if you want to prevent colon cancer, if you don't want your liver to develop cirrhosis, you know, I hope you found it sort of surprising that non-alcoholic steatorrhea or steatohepatitis, it does not involve drinking alcohol, that it's related to the food, and that it is rising in epidemic proportions in our country. We don't like to frighten you, but you really need to be aware of the impact of food on how important this is. And it's not just heart disease, it's not just diabetes, it's not just overweight, it's liver disease, it's kidney disease, it's arthritis and autoimmune disorders. And if this session is not powerful enough to have you do a double take, like, geez, maybe I really do want to get serious about this and protect my health and those in my family if they're willing to listen. Be careful of that, because many family members are resistant to this information. They don't want to hear it. They want to keep eating and be told good things about their bad habits. They want to be told their bacon is healthy for them and that butter is back and that it's good. The name of the doctor is Alan Desmond, D-E-S-M-O-N-D. I will give you the, let me go back and see the name, because you can look it up on YouTube yourself. It's Alan Desmond, Gut Health, How a Plant-Based Diet, let's see. How a plant-based diet can change your world. And he does talk about that also. This goes on another 20 minutes, and he talks about climate change and other issues that we touch upon. It's wonderful lecture by him. Any thoughts from anybody?
Yeah, I thought that was great.
I'm thrilled that I was able to come up with some new issue. Does my heart good.
I thought it was great. It answered some family questions. My grandmother never drank a day in her life, but she died of cirrhosis of the liver.
Uh-huh.
She was a rancher's wife in Southern California and made the best fried chicken with all the Mexican spices. That's the answer.
Yeah,
Uh,
there you
yeah,
go.
the other causes of liver cirrhosis besides alcohol and fat, fatty liver, is hepatitis. You could get hepatitis A, hepatitis B, hepatitis C. So anything that causes the liver to get sick can cause liver cancer, which is what cirrhosis is, essentially liver cancer, just for those of you that aren't familiar. But yeah, the most common now, used to be alcohol was the number one cause of liver cirrhosis. Now it's this steatohepatitis. So steato means fat. The other name for it is just fatty liver disease. You'll hear people call it that as well.
Doug, go ahead. You just unmute though first.
I was going to say two things. About 6 months ago, I was diagnosed with NASH. And so the doctor gave me information on what I should be doing, and essentially whole food, plant-based.
And when you got that information, I'm just curious as to what your take was at that time. Like, did you say, I don't really think this is going to make a difference in my life? Or did you think, boy, I better do something about this, because I'm just curious?
No, I have other issues, and I have a wife that's 6.5 years younger than me, and generally women live 6 years longer. And so I'm really committed to trying to do whatever I can to extend my life, so she'll have a shorter period of being a widow.
So you took it seriously and you started back then changing your diet?
Well, my wife, we have Southern California Kaiser health insurance, and about a year and a half, they have a 16-week whole food plant-based. It's very small scale, but she was able to get into it. So, and she's repeated it twice. And so about 10 or 12 years ago, I was diagnosed with prediabetes. So I was going to classes at the local hospital. They have a series of 4 weekly classes, about 2 hours each on diabetes. And so I started to eat generally healthier even back then. But then she started doing this whole food plant-based through Kaiser. And so, I was essentially having what she ate. And then I throw in some tuna salad sandwiches or chicken salad for lunch, that sort of thing, or have fried eggs and something like that. But I've been gradually transitioning. And in about 2 weeks, I was able to get into this whole food plant-based program through Kaiser, although I had to scream and yell to do it, because basically it's for people who need to lose weight. And I have atherosclerosis. And so on that basis, and abdominal aortic aneurysm that's, been growing over the last 6 years or so. My brother had to have surgery for, older brother. So I've been motivated to do this.
And then one other thing from nutritionfacts.org, since we were talking about fatty liver disease, 1 teaspoon of ground ginger daily for 12 weeks was shown in a study to reduce liver fat in fatty liver disease. So one teaspoon of ground ginger daily. That's one other little thing.
Thank you.
Well, this is Judd. It's Ann's account, but I was diagnosed with fatty liver disease and a non-alcoholic cirrhosis, and that was roughly at the time I went vegan, and I'm getting more and more towards the whole food. I have normal liver function now.
Nice.
I have, for the first time in maybe 35 years, I am no longer obese. I am overweight still, but I've probably taken off about 20 pounds gradually over the last several years.
That's great. Well, thanks for sharing that.
So it works.
Dorothy?
My dad had colon cancer, and so I get a colonoscopy every 5 years. And nobody ever said anything about how foods can help prevent that.
Yeah, so you've just hit upon the sad state of affairs, the standard American doctor. The sad doctors just don't get educated in nutrition, and food is medicine, and it's going to take continuing efforts on Scott's part, my part, the 30 Eugene plant-based providers part, to keep promoting this locally, and then hopefully it starts getting promoted statewide and nationally and then worldwide. This information was not, it was known probably about 30 years ago by Dean Ornish and a few other individuals. You know, John McDougall and Pritikin, they had a clue. They really saw what was happening with people, but the medical profession and society as a whole was not interested in really taking on that message. It interfered with our taste buds, I guess, and it interfered with the food manufacturer's ability to make profit. I don't know. That's just my little soapbox, but you're right. I'm sorry. I apologize for my colleagues, but I was one of those people actually 10 years ago. I just pushed another pill for every ill. I had no clue. It's taken me 10 years of searching around and interacting with people like Scott, who keeps pushing me along with the science and another video or another article. And I've become quite a believer, as you probably know, and so is Scott. And we hope that you become that. And hopefully in the future, we're teaching medical students and we're trying to interact with the community to spread this message. And sad that you never received any of that information.
Yeah, people like Dr. Clapper doing the moving medicine forward. They're actually working on getting. There's actually medical schools now that have some nutrition, lifestyle medicine in their curriculum now. So things.
Scott, hold on a second. I muted you.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
Sorry. Keep going.
When did it get cut off?
Just after you talked about Clapper, moving medicine on.
Oh, so the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, who I'm board certified with, they have a lot of experts that are working on board questions so that the medical boards that doctors have to pass will have lifestyle medicine questions in them. So, you know, it takes a long time. Like even this is general knowledge. I mean, when new science comes out, before it becomes common practice and universally utilized in the medical profession, sometimes it's between 7 and 20 years to kind of get it in there. So it takes the inertia, it takes a long time. And when you've been practicing medicine a certain way, new information comes in, it takes a while to get, you know, to have it be actually changed in your daily practice. So it starts with education and knowing, and a lot of doctors that are doing this are doing it because they had, just like the doctor in the video, they had patients that actually said, hey, yeah, I'm eating this whole food plant-based diet. And what are you doing? Your diabetes is gone. I need to take you off all these medications. So what are you doing? And that's usually how they discover it themselves. And there's a lot of doctors that's their story.
So any other questions or thoughts about the GI system? We got several more videos. If we don't have a lot of questions in a couple weeks, we can kind of play some more. But, you know, we can keep going on into infinity. But this was a pretty good overview. Yes, Doug.
He's muted. You're muted, Doug.
I'm old. Regarding the issues of the problems with dairy and GI. My daughter, when she's growing up, she had a lot of Asian friends, and they're very sensitive to the odors from dairy. And so she ate very little, very little dairy. And she continued to do that. Her son had severe problems when she'd occasionally give him bottles. She breastfed, have bloody stools, and stopped giving him cow's milk. And she noticed that occasionally when she'd have some dairy, then he would have problems. And even breast milk, drinking milk herself and then breastfeeding, it would cause him problems. So it's very sensitive.
Yeah, that topic came up when Dr. Colgrove, the pediatrician, did his class on the plant-based diets for pediatrics and families. That came up. So yeah.
Onions, and my
Yes,
grandson
Jerry.
is broccoli. I'm allergic to onions, and when my mother ate onions, I was breastfed. Then I got colic. I'm probably scared to death because I was.
Kind of broke up when you were allergic to onions and something happened.
Yeah, it probably scared him to death because I was a SIDS baby before they invented that.
Oh, I see. When you were a child, you had problems.
Newborn.
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 Anybody else? We've had, we're getting close to an hour and a half here. We have a couple minutes. If you have one or two more questions.
I was just going to say, if we do have time in a couple weeks, I'd like to see the last 20 minutes of
this video. Yeah, we could potentially do that if we had time. We'll see what questions we have and stuff like that. It's well worth seeing. And again, you can see it on YouTube. It's worth watching. It's for free. Yes, Ken.
Not directly related to GI, but it's absolutely directly related to a lot of things we talked about tonight. I'm on androgen deprivation therapy. So side effect that is absolutely expected is occurring, and that's fairly obvious muscle loss. And I think I mentioned it before, but that's before my primary care physician told me that because I have this muscle loss, because I'm on this hormone, I need to eat 3 ounces of fish or chicken per day. Now, I tell everybody that asks questions that I do not believe you need to eat meat. So him telling me to eat meat, that was kind of nice. I mean, I wanted an excuse to eat meat, but I know peanuts are peanuts are an example of something that's got almost as much protein as hamburger. Well, a cup of peanuts does. A cup of peanuts has as much protein, almost as much protein. So anyway, I know the key is to make sure you eat the right enzymes or the right amino acids so that you make the right proteins, and then you don't need meat. So I need extra proteins. I guess that's what I'm asking. For a person that needs a lot of protein, give me some help here.
Give you some protein foods. By and large, if you eat 500 calories of plant food versus 500 calories of animal food, you're eating a lot more food, so you have to eat enough food. But if you're eating the same amount of calories, you actually get an identical amount of protein. It's close to 30 grams of protein in 500 calories. So you just have to eat a variety of different plant foods And you don't have to necessarily eat peanuts. You don't necessarily have to eat, eating beans and or legumes are high fiber foods with also high amounts of protein. But spinach is 40% protein, and I don't know. I don't think about protein very much anymore in the foods. I just tell people eat enough calories, you're going to get enough protein. What you might be missing out on is the resistance exercises that will help build your muscle mass. Did your doctor tell you that you need to be doing those?
Everybody tells me I need to be doing those.
Did your
Yes.
doctor tell you that?
I think he did, but if he didn't,
Or
my
did he
gut-
just say you need to eat fish and meat? Because oftentimes the most important aspect of maintaining muscle mass is doing the resistance exercises. Do you any thoughts on your part, Scott?
Yeah, just what we always come back to, watch the game changers, all the professional athletes, NFL football players, NBA basketball players, weightlifters, endurance athletes, there's a whole bunch of them that just eat nothing but whole plant foods. They don't eat anything but plants, and they have huge muscle masses. Look at rhinoceros, elephants, giraffes, lowland gorillas, hippopotamus. Huge, the largest land mammals on the planet eat nothing but plants. They don't eat meat. So you want to be as strong as an ox. Ox don't eat meat. They eat plants. So you're gonna, as long as you're getting enough calories, you're gonna get enough protein, and you're gonna get all the right amino acids and everything else as well. So it's just, yeah, you might, as an elderly person, you're on androgen therapy, you probably need maybe 10% more protein than you did when you were a kid. Maybe about that. That's because we don't absorb protein as well when we're older, and that we call that sarcopenia, is muscle loss that happens kind of naturally with aging as well. But as long as you're getting enough calories, wide variety of whole plant foods, getting that resistance exercise, that's all you can really do to maintain the muscle mass. Adding animal products is only going to provide more health risk. It's more chance of cancer, more chance of diabetes, more chance of heart disease. There's no fiber, all these different things. And so you want to make the choice based on the evidence, not based on just what someone that has, no education in nutrition, i.e. doctors, shouldn't be telling you, oh, you should just eat more, because they're just kind of falling into the myths. They're just falling back to what the general population knows. You might as well ask your mailman what you should eat to get more protein, because everyone just says, oh yeah, because everyone just equals protein with animal products, and that's not true, right? And so with everything I just said, so it's just a matter of making the best choice for your health.
And remember also, look at your teeth. What are they most like? Are they like lions and tigers with, that you're going to go out and kill, roadkill and eat meat? And how about your gut? Why is it so long? It's long because it needs to metabolize and absorb the plants that you were meant to eat. Your food is plants. It's not animals. And Dr. McDougall makes a very important point. I've listened to him a number of times, and it makes a lot of sense. Just think about how our bodies are made. If you're starving and you have nothing else to eat, then you can eat your meat. That's my thoughts. Doug, there's a hand up. Maybe it was left from the last time.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No problem. This has been fun as usual. Scott, I really appreciate what you're doing. And I love coming to class with you every week, and I look forward to doing it. What's going on next week? What are we doing?
It's a conglomeration of autoimmune disease, thyroid health, and let's see, what was the other one? Arthritis. And
okay.
So it'll probably be a two-parter, because I think between all three of those topics, with all the videos and everything, we'll probably end up doing 2 weeks covering that. And then the week after that, we'll do a open forum for GI, so for tonight, as well as the 2 weeks of thyroid health, autoimmune disease, and arthritis.
Perfecto. Okay, everybody, thank you all for your input, for all your questions. We love being with you. Look forward to it every week. And we'll see you again sometime. Bring your friends or family.
Sorry we missed the walk. We'll see you in the movies, though.
You'll make another one.
Thank you.
Thank you for
All
great
right.
tonight.
You're welcome.
Have a good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank